Today I have the distinct honor of introducing one of the most well-respected federal judges in the nation. Judge William H. Pryor Jr. sits on the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. Initially appointed by President George W. Bush in 2004, Judge Pryor's appointment was confirmed by the Senate in 2005. Before taking the bench, Judge Pryor served as Attorney General of the state of Alabama from 1997 to 2004. When he was first appointed to that position in 1997, he was the youngest Attorney General in the nation. In 1998, he was elected to a full term as Attorney General and was re-elected to that office in 2002. Judge Pryor is a graduate, magna cum laude, of the Tulane Law School, where he served as editor-in-chief of the Tulane Law Review, was a member of the Order of the Coif, and a recipient of the George Dewey Nelson Memorial Award. After graduating from law school, Judge Pryor served as a law clerk for Judge John Minor Wisdom of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. Following his judicial clerkship, Judge Pryor entered private practice as a litigator in Birmingham, and for 6 years served as an adjunct professor of admiralty at the Cumberland School of Law at Samford University. Since 2006, Judge Pryor has also served as a visiting professor of federal jurisdiction at the University of Alabama School of Law. Judge Pryor is a member of the American Law Institute and the Board of Advisory Editors of the Tulane Law Review. He is a fellow of the Alabama Law Foundation, Vice President of the Alabama Center for Law and Civic Education, and a former chairman of the Federalism and Separation of Powers Practice Group of the Federalist Society. In 2002 to 2003, Judge Pryor served as a member of the State and Local Senior Advisory Committee of the White House Office on Homeland Security. Judge Pryor has been awarded honorary doctorates of law from John Marshall Law School in Atlanta and Regent University in Virginia, and has lectured and published widely. In addition to publishing in numerous law reviews and legal journals, Judge Pryor has also published op-eds in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Times, and USA Today. Additionally, Judge Pryor has testified before several U.S. Senate committees regarding capital punishment, environmental law, and the role of the judiciary. Judge Pryor is married and has 2 children. Please join me in welcoming Judge Bill Pryor.
Good afternoon. What a build-up. It's my pleasure to be here. I guess this room today gives me a sense I often have of what it is like to be middle-aged. On my court, I'm the youngest by far, but in my chambers, I'm always the oldest guy with my law clerks and staff attorney and administrator. When I arrive here in this room for lunch on Wednesdays with the Downtown Rotary Club, I feel like I'm the youngest in the room. And then today, and you can, if you want to, Mitch, tell me I'm wrong, but I suspect I'm the oldest in the room today. He says I'm close. But I've looked forward to being here. Now, my topic today is my court. I spoke with my former student, you remember Kevin Garrison, about what I should talk about today, and we talked about the possibility of me speaking about my role while I was Attorney General and dealing with the prosecution and removal from office of then Chief Justice Roy Moore. I'm kind of tired of talking about that, but if you have questions about it, I'm going to leave some time for questions. I'll be happy to answer them and talk a little bit about it. We also talked about the possibility of me talking about some subject like judicial independence, which gets attention in the news. But you can ask me questions about that, but I'm kind of tired of talking about that too. But when I was greeted today, though, one of your members said, oh, how was the drive over today? Assuming, of course, that because my court is headquartered in Atlanta, that I must live there. That's why I want to talk about my court today. I get a lot of questions about the court, and it's an important court. It's a great privilege to serve on it. It's a subject near and dear to my heart. But I've learned that even with a lot of lawyers, there's a lot of mystery surrounding the subject of our court. So some of what I'll say will be familiar to those of you who are lawyers. You can at least act or pretend like you know what I'm talking about. But I hope that I can offer some new information for everyone. I became a judge, as was mentioned earlier, on February 20th, 2004, when President Bush appointed me during a recess of the United States Senate. That was so fun. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And the Senate confirmed my appointment for a lifetime term on June 9th, 2005. I'm honored to serve on the court. It's an outstanding court. It's my dream job. I'd like to talk about several aspects of our court, how we accomplish our work, what our work is, the history of our court, the size and members of our court, and the size and quality of our staffs. After I give that overview, I'd be happy to answer your questions. But I'm not going to speak about appeals that are pending before our court or are likely to come before our court. There are a few of those that have been in the news. I will mention that they are in the news, but I'm not going to talk about them otherwise. Our court, as the name suggests, hears appeals. Along with 12 other circuit courts, we are the second highest court in the nation, and ordinarily, we're your last stop for an appeal, except in the rare appeal that the Supreme Court of the United States will entertain. But that's only 65 to 70 cases from the review of our 12 circuit courts, plus the 50 state Supreme Courts. So that should give you an idea of just how rare it is to get a case before the Supreme Court of the United States. Most of our appeals come from the federal district court. Some of our appeals come from the immigration court system. Most of our work involves appeals about criminal offenders or their confinement in federal and state prisons. We hear appeals about federal criminal trials, state prisoners who complained that they were wrongfully convicted or unjustly punished while in prison, and state prisoners sentenced to death. We also hear appeals in civil cases in federal courts, which range from large commercial disputes to class actions to civil rights and employment discrimination cases to denials of benefits by the Social Security Administration. The vast majority of our appeals involve questions of federal law. But we also decide appeals about state law when the parties are citizens of different states. Our court has heard many appeals that received national and international attention. The matter of Elian Gonzalez's deportation from Miami to Cuba was heard and decided by our court. The Terry Schiavo appeal was heard by our court after Congress passed a law on that matter. I sat on a panel that heard an appeal about former Alabama football coach Mike Price's lawsuit against Sports Illustrated. One of the appeals about the 2000 presidential election came to our court. Last year, I wrote a decision for our court about the public funding of campaigns for candidates for governor of Florida in the midst of the election campaign. The 11th Circuit, of course, heard two appeals in 1994 and 1995 about the election of Chief Justice Perry Hooper to the Supreme Court of Alabama, and our court, of course, heard the appeal about former Chief Justice Roy Moore's monument of the Ten Commandments. I was not a member then. Our court is currently considering the appeals of former Governor Don Siegelman and Richard Scrushy. I've recused myself from those appeals because I served as Attorney General when the investigation started, and that investigation led to the plea of two of the key witnesses in their trial. One of the you might have read in the paper this morning that former Mayor Larry Langford's appeal is now before our court. One of the district courts in our circuit has pending before it a challenge filed by about 20 states to the federal reform of health care, and an appeal will come to us. You've read about that in the news in the last week. I mentioned those again to warn you that I'm not going to talk about those things. Those are matters, though, that are before our court. In the last several years, three kinds of appeals have kept us especially busy. First, in 2005, the Supreme Court decided that the federal sentencing guidelines for criminal cases were no longer binding on federal district judges. That decision led to hundreds of appeals, but that litigation has now returned to normal levels. Second, we've had a large number of appeals about death sentences in the states in our jurisdiction. With Alabama, Florida, and Georgia, there are a lot of offenders on death row. 15 years ago, Congress reformed the law that governs our review of these appeals when it enacted the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, and those appeals are moving now more quickly as a result of that legislation. Third, immigration appeals have been a substantial source of our work because the last administration, the Bush administration, reduced a big backlog of applications for asylum and other kinds of relief, but those petitions are also returning to a normal level. As for history, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals was created by Congress in 1981 by splitting what had been the old Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Fifth Circuit, which is still headquartered in New Orleans, formerly governed appeals in much of the South, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. After the split, the Fifth Circuit was comprised of the three states to our west, and the 11th Circuit was and still is today comprised of the states of Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. The former Fifth Circuit had grown far too large, with too many appeals and too many judges to decide its caseload efficiently. There is another court that falls into that category these days. You can guess which one it is. It's out in the west coast of our country. The judge for whom I served as a law clerk, John Minor Wisdom, opposed splitting our court, but it was an inevitable and necessary decision. Today, our court is one of the busiest and most efficient court of appeals in the nation. During my tenure, we have heard more appeals per judge than any other circuit, and we have been the second fastest in deciding our appeals. We are efficient because we send to oral argument only the most difficult appeals, oral argument being where we actually have the lawyers come to the courtroom and present us with arguments, and we're able to ask them questions and grill them for about half an hour each appeal. We hear oral arguments in only about 15% of our appeals. In a typical year, each judge participates in the resolution of about 500 appeals and drafts the opinions for our court in roughly a third of those appeals. We divide the work evenly. The question I'm asked most frequently is where I now live and work, and whether that's in Atlanta. The answer is no. Readers of the newspapers know that our court is headquartered in Atlanta, but that's half the story. I live in Vestavia Hills. My main chambers are in the Hugo Black Courthouse here in Birmingham. I have a smaller chambers in our Atlanta courthouse. Many of you may recall that gosh, though y'all are so young you may not, that the late Judge Robert Vance served on our court for several years before he was murdered at his Mountain Brook home by a mail bomber named Walter Leroy Moody. I work in the chambers where Judge Vance used to work. I travel several weeks of the year to Atlanta, Miami, Jacksonville, and Montgomery to conduct court business, especially to hear oral arguments in difficult appeals. These travels explain the name for our court, because the judges, as the old term has been used, ride the circuit to conduct our business. But most of the year, I live and work here. No offense to the folks in Atlanta, which I enjoy visiting, but I would not have accepted the appointment if it had required that I live there. The judges of our court typically, and the reason is, Mr. Reamer could appreciate it, is it would take me